Welcome to our Minnesota Legislative Recap. I'm Catherine Grinberg, the Executive Vice President here at the Chamber, and with me is Cale Dunwoody, our Director of Public Policy, to share a little bit about some of the outcomes of the Minnesota legislative session. We're going to kind of go high level through a lot of different things, right? So not
Yes.
just necessarily what our priorities were or weren't, but just kind of an overall educational piece.
Yep.
Do you want to maybe start by telling everyone when did session end? What session were we on here?
Yeah.
Just kind of some general opening thoughts, Cale?
Yeah. So the session ended back in May 20, 22nd. It was the 93rd Minnesota legislature. And so in the Minnesota legislature, they're restricted to a certain date. And so um, they were working up until that date, actually finished a little bit earlier, a couple hours earlier than expected. But a lot of things passed the legislature this session. And we're just going to give you a little overview of some of those things, but just know that there was a lot of content that passed the legislature, and it was significant to the state.
Yeah, absolutely. And taxes, bonding, capital projects, there's a lot of
Yes.
different conversations happening this legislative session. Some of
Yeah.
the social issues got the limelight, especially at the beginning of the session,
Yeah.
but there was other things that happened throughout. So we're going to try to cover kind of a gamut of things. So let's start with taxes. How about that?
Yeah.
Knowing that there was a tax bill that passed this year, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, first, I think it's important to talk about last session because that kind of played a pivotal role. So last session, Minnesota was one of the only divided state governments across the nation. Which when you have divided government with between the Republican and the DFL caucus, there's a lot of compromise that has to come to the table in order to get things passed. And so we were, last session there was a major tax bill on the plate of the legislature. Our local representative, now Commissioner Paul Morecourt, along with Senator Nelson out of Rochester, had kind of came together working across the aisle to put together a comprehensive tax package that would bring some great relief to Minnesotans, and bring a great deal of tax relief for folks. That ultimately didn't get passed, and so now the Minnesota legislature really wanted to focus on tax uh, policy again. Unfortunately, this legislative session, there was a lot of moving around of tax policies, a significant amount of increases in taxes for certain individuals and corporations, but then there's also a significant amount of tax relief for for folks, child care tax credit. One of the big issues that was really focused on was Social Security tax. It was a bipartisan issue, and they wanted to see a full elimination on both sides of the aisle. They ended up compromising on a threshold that they thought was comparable on the Democrats or the DFL side of the aisle. So overall, the tax bill, just to kind of run through some, there's the rebate checks. That's something that made headlines. Kind of considered those walls bucks or walls dollars, whatever walls checks.
Mhm.
And so just to kind of rattle off a few numbers, for a married filing jointly, a couple married filing jointly, earning less than $150,000, would be eligible for um, $260 in rebates plus an additional credit per dependent. So some significant relief for some of those folks making underneath that threshold, um, along with uh, along with a number of other things. But overall, it was really just kind of a adjusting of the tax structure and where things were being taxed. And one of the major things for corporations and businesses is called a guilty tax, and so it's kind of it's a very complicated system, but it's about taxing certain global incomes and stuff like that. And so that increased taxes about 12 million bucks this legislative session. So kind of raising taxes to pay for other things in a time of surplus.
Absolutely. So kind of overall tax bill imposed 2 billion in new taxes is what we were looking at for this
Yeah,
session.
yep, yep. And so, just to also give just a little bit of context, the legislature passed, or the legislature didn't pass. They entered the legislative session with a $17 billion surplus, and so most Republicans were saying, with that big of a surplus, let's cut the budget. Let's return the dollars to the individuals. And we were, unfortunately, we were seeing them kind of raise taxes, and we'll talk a little bit more about where other things they raise some money at. So
Yeah, thank you. No, that's a good comprehensive overview of the tax policy that happened this session. The next topic I want to dig into is a pretty big beast in itself, and that's paid leave. This was something that DFL had as their caucus's top priority or one of their top priorities. You can see that signified through it being House File 2, Senate File 2, right? So, being that it was one of those first ones means that it's a big priority. This was really kind of a one size fits all as far as all small business, big business didn't
yeah,
matter. Looking at paid leave and what that means for businesses providing for employees to be able to take leave in certain situations. So
yeah.
requires all employers to opt into this state-run program. Tell us a little bit about what that program is, and what it means for businesses.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, when we look at the paid family and medical leave, I think it's important to note that, I don't think there's anybody out there that would say that they don't support paid leave of some, but we're saying from our standpoint that it should, let the private sector determine what that amount should be, not necessarily, like you said, have a one size fits all. I think,
Mhm.
there's medical emergencies and family emergencies and times where folks need that leave. And we were just simply saying, as a chamber of commerce, let the private market kind of adjust to the needs of their employers. And I think, as we were looking at this legislative session, this is something that, as you said, was a significant priority for the DFL caucus, and it was frankly, it was a significant priority for the chambers across the state because it was so impactful to businesses. And so I would say that this is probably one of the biggest pieces of legislation to pass. Um, that's especially on a border community that's going to have some impact on
Mhm.
businesses. And so just a little bit about the program. They kind of went back and forth on the number of weeks, but as it sits, folks across the state of Minnesota, employees across the state of Minnesota would be eligible for up to 20 weeks of paid leave per year. Um, and
And
so,
that includes Kale. The 20 weeks includes both the family and medical,
yes,
correct? You can
there's a
stack them.
yep, there's a combination of if you take 12 weeks of medical leave, then you have 8 weeks of
Got it.
family leave, or vice versa.
Mhm.
And throughout the legislative session, there was a lot of negotiation on should it be 20 weeks, should it be 24 weeks, should it be what should be the
Mhm.
right number. And that's where once again we were saying each individual has their significant or has their unique needs, and let the business community kind of decide where that should go to meet their needs.
Mhm.
But overall, when we're looking at this, it's a significant increase in government spending, increase in government employees, and it all really kind of comes on the backs of both the employers and the employees of the state of Minnesota. And so
Yeah. So
when
tell us how we're paying for it.
yes, yes, so the legislature injected a significant amount of cash to kind of get this program started, and really what this program is it's similar to unemployment insurance. Is you pay into a pool, and then when you utilize this leave, the pool, you will withdraw money from the pool to pay for your salary, and it's not 100% salary reimbursement. There's a sliding scale based off your wages, your weekly wages. Um, but anyways, so they injected the original cash to kind of get the system up and going and kind of establish this office that would be handled or would be within the Department of Employment and Economic Development. And then in addition to that, when the program starts in 2026, there will also be a payroll tax increase. I think that's one of the most significant things that we were very concerned about was that this is just an additional tax in a time of economic uncertainty, in a place where folks all around the state of Minnesota are lowering taxes, they're lowering income tax. I mean, we
Mhm.
in our last video we talked a lot about the North Dakota uh, comprehensive tax package and how that was reducing dollars. Um, so we were just very concerned with that. We want to make sure Minnesota stays competitive, and this is just another kind of step in the wrong direction of making it harder to do business
Mhm.
in Minnesota.
And
Um,
of that 0.7% payroll tax that you're talking about, that can be shared between the employer and the employee. Uh, the employer needs to keep a portion of it, but they can pass them off to the employee as well, which again just brings more onto the individual. But either
yeah,
way, 0.7% payroll tax, at least for this time
yeah,
being.
yeah. You're completely right on that. The employer is responsible for at least 50% of that payroll tax, and they are eligible to can offset the other 50% by passing that along to their employees. Once again, that kind of is disadvantageous for businesses just because now they're kind of it's going to be added to the negotiating kind of
Hmm.
portion of things, and it's a significant increase for businesses. Now you might see businesses, and this is one of the arguments that we were saying was now you might see businesses, reduce some of their benefits in order to pay for this benefit because now they have to pay for a significant portion of this, and so it just adds it to the whole benefit package and just makes it a little bit more complicated to do business in Minnesota.
And as you talk about benefit scale and ones that they may currently have, I think it's important to note there is an exemption to not have to, buy into this program basically, pay into it, but it has to be only if your benefits are comparable or greater to, and
Yeah,
that's not very flexible, right? So
yeah,
it's pretty straightforward as far as if you give 8 weeks but it's fully paid, that's not comparable because it's less weeks, right? So
yes, yeah.
it's kind of a high threshold, but there is an opt out process for if you offer the equal or better.
Yeah, and I think, as we were kind of watching this track through the legislative session, we were trying to say, well, if you give 8 weeks at 100%, that should be somewhat comparable at, versus
Hmm.
if you give 12 weeks at 60 per or whatever the kind
Hmm.
of the combination is, and they stuck pretty firmly to that, and, they added a few other exemptions, and so there's an exemption for seasonal employees, but there's still some ambiguity in that. We really, we're really worried about that, especially as we are so close to the lakes region. We have our agricultural background here, and it's just devastating for some of those
Hmm.
communities. And we were happy to see some carve outs for exemptions for those communities, but still very much ambiguous. There's some small business grants. There's some ways that the small businesses can be exempt from some of the payroll tax, but it's all very complicated. I think that's the
Yeah.
biggest thing, and that's at the end of the day, um, this is going to be very detrimental to small businesses, especially in our region that are on a border community. When you think about having just to add another layer of work for an HR person, and oftentimes when you're in a small business, you're the HR person, you're the
Hmm.
stocker, you're doing you're wearing a lot of hats, and so this just adds another layer uh, of 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 work to it, and it just it really increases um, the burden on businesses, and so that's just devastating for Minnesota businesses.
Yeah, no, definitely well said. It's something that we tracked very closely, as you can tell, and we're very passionate about during the legislative session. And the other thing that we didn't even talk about this portion is you have to keep the job for that individual, right? So you
Yeah,
have to hold that same position for them to come back. So um, in this labor market, the concern of how we're going to find employees to stock the shelves or drive the trucks or whatever needs to be done while that individual's on leave. So
yeah,
certainly, some concerning pieces to it, but at least we kind of know where it stands now. 2026 is the this when it
yeah.
starts. Is that
Yep.
right?
So there's kind of this ramp up period to make sure
Okay.
that they get the 400 over 400 employees onboarded. Well, not quite all 400, but by the
Hmm.
time this is fully ramped up, I think their goal is to have 400 employees. But get this all started, they're going to do an actuarial study, but they're doing a study after they pass the legislation. So it's just going to be really important to you working with our local deed representatives and working with our local legislators to make sure you let them know what the pain points are,
Hmm.
because this isn't this isn't set in stone forever. There's obviously some ways we can work through this, but it was very hard to get past, a very hard pill to swallow at this point. But we just gotta take it for what it is and work through some of the pain points and make sure that we're still advocating for business and pro business legislation in the Minnesota legislature.
Definitely. Well, to move on to the next piece, it's kind of similarly related in some aspects, and that's workforce,
Yeah.
right? We hear from businesses all the time that workforce is one of the most difficult barriers to expanding and growth and prosperity of their business.
Hmm.
So, talking about workforce, different things happened this session. I think Minnesota took it different than in some other states as far as how they invested in workforce and the
Hmm.
policies that relate to workforce. Can you talk a little bit about maybe just a few of the highlights of what happened
Yeah.
within workforce where we saw dollars going?
Yeah, the workforce bill is a standalone bill that included jobs and economic development and business community development, workforce development, all these different things. And so it's a very comprehensive package. But just to highlight a few things is there was 25 million for workforce grants for targeted populations, kind of hitting on that diversity, equity, inclusion, the entrepreneurs, things like that, job skills training. There was also a significant investment into childcare. I think that when you look at the workforce crisis across the Midwest, is that there's a lot of similarities,
Hmm.
and so the legislature in Minnesota made some significant investments in the childcare, as well as stood up an office of childcare partnership, and so um, you know those pain points, no matter if you're on the east or west side of the Red River, or childcare is one of those pain points that hits everyone equally. But we're just going to see a little bit maybe a different approach by the two state governments. In addition to those things, there's also a number of things within this comprehensive proposal that kind of just stacks more on the backs of businesses.
Hmm.
And so one of those is a sick and safe leave mandate, and this is on top of the paid family and medical leave. And so at the end of the day, an employee is able to take um, 48 hours of sick and safe time a year, and they have to be able to at least accrue. So there's a requirement that businesses are now having to follow, saying that you have to give your employees a certain amount of sick and safe time. Once again, we are in support of the time that employees need for whatever it may be. But once again, we say that the private market should be determining that, because overall, when you look at benefits, some people might need childcare benefits instead of this benefit, or they have to be able to be flexible for that employee's needs. And so, unfortunately, this is stacks on top of that paid family and medical leave. Um, and so that's just an example of some of the things that were in this bill that's going to be a little bit detrimental to businesses on top of the already massive mandates that are going through. So
Yeah, well, that's helpful to know. Workforce seems like it can span a lot of different areas, right? Or it
yes,
impacts a lot of areas, or a lot of things impact it rather, maybe.
yeah,
So you look at paid leave, you look at a lot of these different programs that they're starting up, all kind of contributes to the workforce ecosystem.
yes, most definitely. And I think it's important that we maintain businesses, because I think it's
Hmm.
great that they're focusing all these efforts on workforce and attracting workforce to the state of Minnesota. We also have to attract business to the state of Minnesota. We have to
Hmm.
have that economic development to make sure that we keep businesses in our region and establish new businesses. And frankly, it's tough. We're just gonna see maybe a different Minnesota on the business climate after some of these things get ramped up and rolled out, and businesses are going to have to really watch to make sure that they're following all these new requirements.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, let's move to another one of the kind of community issues
Yeah.
is transportation.
Yes.
And transportation is something very important for our region here, especially as you look at Moorhead and the many railroad crossings and such that we have. Something that was included was Moorhead's 11th Street rail grade separation, which is the
Yeah.
underpass project.
Yes. Yep.
But tell us a little overall about investment in transportation this legislative session, and maybe touch on that Moorhead project. What happened there?
Yeah. So the Minnesota legislature made a significant investment into roads and bridges and infrastructure. Very similar, capitalizing on the legislation that passed in Washington D.C. and making sure we're utilizing some of those dollars. But with that significant investment also came some increases. For instance, the gas tax increase, and so especially when folks are like going back to the economy right now, it's not the best time to be raising prices on everything, especially with inflation and all these other things stacking up. But there's now going to be an increase on gas tax, and it's not to exceed a rate of 3% starting in August of 2025. And I think that it's adjusting for inflation, but it's paying for some of these things
Mm-hmm.
that were in this bill, along with another tax increase or tax was the delivery tax. And so and there's certain things that are included and certain things that aren't, based off of the companies, what the company's selling and
Mm-hmm.
what their revenues are. But there's a delivery tax on retail deliveries, 50 cents on anything over $100. and so that's that's going to just another another way for to pay for some of these things, but
Mhm.
it's just not the right time when, like I said, everybody's reducing taxes to try to incentivize people to move and businesses to move to their region.
Yeah. So the overall bill funded projects all over the state,
Yeah.
Duluth and
Yes.
Twin Cities area, and we
Hmm.
did get something out here. That was
Yes.
great. Moorhead got the rail grade separation, the underpass, $10
Hmm.
million request there. That's gonna finish the underpass, or tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about
Yeah.
the.
So the 11th Street underpass is really a project not only for just kind of that connecting both sides of the railroad, on either
Mhm.
side of the railroad tracks, but it's also a safety thing, making sure folks can cross safely and this and can
Emergency.
drive safely, and those emergency responders can make it to call safely. And so this project was really a combination between state, federal, and local funding,
Mhm.
and this $10 million gets it to its finish line, so they can really start the construction and get that well underway. And I think it's a fantastic. I'm very happy that the legislature included that in there. There
Mhm.
was times where we were wondering where is it going to be, because it's a capital project, and just very thankful for our legislators in our region to have make sure that was included in the transportation bill.
Yeah. Well, great segue into the next topic of capital
Yes.
projects. Yeah, as you said, the railroad crossing, the rail grade separation project, the underpass. We weren't sure where would that end
Yeah.
up, but that was transportation. Now let's move to capital investments.
Hmm.
This is another a big piece of what the legislature worked on,
Yeah.
an area that our community saw some impact out of as well. Tell us a little bit about overall the capital projects and what our region brought home.
Yeah, well, I think looking back, that the legislature hasn't passed a bonding bill since 2020, and bonding is significant in Minnesota for some of these projects, and it's a little bit different than what we're used to in the North Dakota side. Bonding is a little bit of they like to pay cash for
Yeah.
and and um, in Minnesota, this session kind of took a multi-pronged approach to that. They were going to pay cash for some things, and they were going to bond some things. And that really was at the end of the day, was because they weren't sure where they were going to uh, get all if they weren't sure if they were going to get all the votes needed. And so
Mhm.
when you look at the Minnesota legislature, they have to have a supermajority. You can't just have 51% to pass a bonding bill. You have to have that supermajority, and so that requires bipartisan support. And really, where the DFL kind of pain point was they had one seat majority. They had a one seat majority in the Senate, and so they had to bring Republicans to the table in order to pass a bonding bill. For the longest of time, it seemed like the bonding bill was not going to happen,
Mhm.
and so the legislature actually had a cash bill, so a capital investments bill that was going to be paid by some of these surplus funds and
Yep.
other things like that. And so for our community, we've been waiting for these bonding projects. Obviously, like I said, 2020 was the last time we had
Mhm.
gotten a bonding bill passed, and there's some significant needs in our. I think
Mhm.
that's one of the things that this bonding bill allows for is some of these smaller regions or growing regions like ours to invest in some of the capital infrastructure, capital investments in our region. So at the end of the day, the legislature ended up passing both, which was fantastic for our region because we were able to get a significant amount of the priorities funded this legislative session. So it makes up for
Mhm.
some of those missed opportunities in the past, such as the Dilworth Fire Station, something that has been a priority for
Mhm.
our legislators, former and current, the governor, and a number of other folks. Just because, once again, it's that public safety thing where our
Mhm.
region is growing very rapidly, and the Dilworth Fire Station was just simply antiquated and was not up to the standards that were needed for our current community. And so something we worked
Mhm.
significantly, or worked a significant amount on, and very happy to see that go through another once again another kind of the state and local partnership on
Mhm.
funding. Weld Hall on MSUM, another building that's once again antiquated and just needed to be updated to meet the current needs of students.
And those 2, Kayla, it's funny you say that. Those are some of the projects that we've been talking about for years, right?
Yes,
These
yes.
aren't things that just came up this year. It's some of the legislators we'd have conversations. They'd be like, just take the money so we don't have to hear about that project again, right?
Yes,
And so,
yes. Weld Hall is a
joking aside,
yeah.
it was good we got those
Yeah, Weld
done.
Hall is well known by every legislator, I think, across the
Yes.
state. And is last year we shot that video at the Dilworth Fire Station
Mhm.
and sent it to a number of legislators, and that gained a lot of traction with the Dilworth Fire Station.
Mhm.
Obviously, the governor's steadfast support for the Dilworth Fire Station was helped that
Mhm.
increase popularity. But um, yeah, those are two significant
Mhm.
projects, along with Moorhead flood protection. As we're looking at flood
Yes.
protection in our region, that kind of finishes off some of the projects needed for permanent flood protection on the Moorhead side of things to wrap into the whole overall diversion project. Unfortunately, we didn't get quite to where we needed to be. We only received $11 million. We were looking for about 24. So I think we can get through some of those projects, but once again, having to go back to the legislature with that same ask again for this flood protection. And then there's a Moorhead Readiness Center that's going to get some upgrades to meet the current needs of our military personnel over in the Minnesota side. So a lot of things that were included in there: roads, bridges, projects, buildings, all those kinds of different things. But for our region, we made we had a significant win when it comes to capital investment.
Yeah, no, that's a good overview. The fact that we did pretty well, and our area has 3 legislators, and
Yeah,
so being able to pull those kind of projects out was a pretty big success for especially the couple of them freshman legislators, but
yeah,
they worked hard to try to get some of those things done.
yes,
So
yes,
and it can't would be remiss if I didn't say the business community support on a lot of that made a difference. So
definitely,
the legislators need the backing of the business community. We
definitely,
really saw that on these projects. The city, county, business
yeah,
chamber came together and really stood up for these projects. So that's what got it past the finish line.
definitely,
Well, before we end, I'd love to hear a little bit your take maybe on some of the additional topics. I mentioned there was
yeah,
a few social issues that came up, but we just had kind of an array of different bills that came forward this session.
yeah,
Minnesota's a little bit different as far as that not every bill gets a hearing, not every bill goes to the floor.
yeah.
But there were still some interesting ones. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts.
Yeah, so overall, there was this once again, kind of going back to my first comment, there was some significant content passed the legislature, through bills and number of things. One of those was the marijuana legislation that passed. It's becoming recreational marijuana is becoming increasingly popular across the nation. In Minnesota, was able to get adult use cannabis across the finish line. And I'm not going to dive too far into that, but there's some, especially in a border community, just looking at the safety aspect of it and things like that. But they passed that significant bill along with an energy bill. Once again, kind of hitting on that border community side of things. When North Dakota is an energy powerhouse and sending a lot of their energy across now, by 20, 2040, carbon free energy, electricity coming to Minnesota. They want to have carbon free electricity, which makes it significantly tougher for some of our businesses. I mean, I think we're, as a Chamber of Commerce, we're for all of the above energy solutions. And so this was a significant bill that passed that's going to be impactful to our energy industry, along with some other things, free college tuition for certain folks that are within certain income thresholds. And then there's one last thing is called PFAS. It's something that's not
Mhm.
super in depth on, but it's some chemicals that are in some of our everyday essential products, and it's kind of banning some of these chemicals from being put into things like carpeting and cleaning products and cookware and all these different things. I think well intentioned with making sure that we're protecting folks and making sure that folks are staying healthy. But it just one of those things that they see how far they went. I guess we'll
Mhm.
have to see if they went a little too far or if it was just the right amount. So
Yeah, so a array of other topics too, but those are some good highlights as far as
yes, yes, for
some of
sure.
the other bills that didn't fit neatly into the other areas that we talked about. But
Yeah.
anything else in this legislative session, Kale, that you want to recap for us today?
Yeah, well, I think it just kind of go back to some of the things talked about was $17.5 billion surplus.
Mhm.
That's a significant amount of money for the state of Minnesota. And when we look at going into the next legislative session, how much of that's going to be remaining, making sure that we can capitalize on that, I guess, and whether that be through tax cuts or invest capital investments, things like that. And the legislature set aside some money But really looking at the next legislative session, I think, is important because, like you said, it was, a lot of these things didn't get across the finish line, like our capital investments, without the support of businesses and the support of the counties and cities and all those. And as we, look at these projects and look at some of these, these things that I call pain points or,
Mhm.
detrimental things, is continuing to work together to make legislation better and continuing that advocacy effort jointly. As you mentioned, we only have three local legislators from our region specifically, and really, how can we make a difference in Minnesota? How can we start working with legislators not only across the state of Minnesota, but that are in bordering communities that are similar to ours,
Mhm.
to pass good legislation that's not going to be quite as detrimental to businesses.
Absolutely, yeah. Pro business, pro community kind of legislation that we can see on that side of
Yes.
the river.
Yeah.
So that is a little bit of a recap on Minnesota. We will have a full blog post that you can find, as well as an event coming up. We're going to bring our legislators in to do a little bit of a recap so that you can hear it directly from them on the things that they were working on, some unfinished business that they might have,
Yeah.
and priorities upcoming. And then we'll also be publishing our legislative review guide, which will show you how the legislators in our area voted specifically on some of the most important bills for us. So you'll find things like the paid leave in there. You'll find some of those bonding projects in there, things that we either very much opposed or supported that we want on record. So you can check that out as well. I would encourage you to be involved in that way. Otherwise, just want to end with a big thank you to our businesses for your engagement. Thank you specifically to our public policy committee as well as our policy sponsors. You power all of this work, and I hope you can see the value that it is to have the chamber out there in front advocating on your behalf. And finally, want to thank Kale. It's quite the task to go through legislative sessions both at once in North Dakota, Minnesota, and you followed all this very well and kept our members up to date. So thank you for that. And with that, we will see you next time. Thanks so much for joining us.